Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's good to be with you here in February. Hard to believe we're already in February 2021. So I hope you're working well on those New Year's resolutions and haven't given up on those yet. Today we've got Larry Olsen. We'll introduce Larry in just a second. But the point of Power Lunch Live is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, CEOs, people who are doing amazing work in the world that can help us get better at what we do. That is the whole point of the show. Now, we do ask that you participate. So if you have a question for Larry, from myself, please get on one of the platforms that you're listening in and or watching in on and send us a message. We monitor LinkedIn, we monitor Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We monitor all those platforms. So when you ask a question, we can put it to the guest. Now, Larry Olsen is an international speaker, author, podcast host, and executive coach. He's got years of experience working with Fortune 50 companies, championship teams, and entrepreneurs on establishing their vision and sense of purpose. His book, his best-selling book, Get a Vision and Live It, is helping people learn how to change their attitudes to align with their vision. Larry, welcome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's nice to have you on finally. We've been working to sync up our schedules for a bit, so I'm finally glad we were able to get it done. I know this is an exhausted sort of topic, but I want to get your take on it because it is something that I think is relevant. And I mean, you work with a lot of high performing leaders, a lot of organizations, and I just want to get your sense of how has the pandemic changed leadership in your view? Or has it?
I think it's changed it from the perspective of the body language and tone of voice, which sends so many messages to us when we're communicating with another human being. So this difference in medium, just when I'm talking to you now, I have to look into the mic rather than look into you, or I'm looking at you instead of, there's a little self-consciousness that comes into play, especially if you're not comfortable with the medium.
Right.
The other element is attempting to keep an audience. These people are at home, they've got all kinds of distractions going on. So one of the most important things that they're taking away from this is they have to make sure that there's a lot of involvement when they're engaging through this medium. Otherwise, it's just really interesting to this is not about me, or this is just another meeting. I'm zoomed out, and all of us have great information we want to share. We wouldn't be sharing with one another. And make sure, the key issue is to make sure that the people are actually listening.
How do you help a team now as a coach, the work that you're doing? A lot of people are still doing remote work. And for a lot of companies, a fair amount of their workforce may even stay remote. How does a leader, or how does an organization, get people motivated, keep people motivated? How do you set sort of goals and KPIs and things in this environment? And what are you seeing in that respect? How are people sort of pivoting and doing things like that now?
Well, I think now that there's been enough time under their belt that they've begun to get used to this. And one of the elements that's so key is, what are they going through? I know a lot of leaders who are spending more time on the caring piece. In other words, actually interested in how they're dealing with this new change and what kind of issues are they having. It opens up wonderful coaching opportunities. And when, as you all know, that great Roosevelt statement, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. One of the best ways to do that is to just listen to them, and don't have always the first issue and the first item on the agenda. What are you doing for us today? And that's a very important element. But if you really want people engaged in it, they need to feel like there's a connection that's been made. And there's a variety of ways to do that, and everyone kind of has their own genre or forte on how they go about getting people to recognize that they care, if that's an issue, if that's important to them to begin with. And there's another issue that comes into play. My background's in neuropsychology, which is basically what are they thinking about, and what is taking place inside of them when you're sending instruction or you're asking for follow-up or whatever. And if you haven't connected with that, you recognize that still, and Rhett, I still find this amazing, 95% of leaders today still motivate from fear. They still, and fear is not, I'm going to fire you, you're going to be punished. Fear is an element where you could lose some respect if you don't have this done the way we want it. You're not on time. You're getting way distracted by what's going on at home. We're letting you work at home. What else do you want? And those little subtle elements drive people to come from a position of fear. And unfortunately, you can imagine what percentage of our performance we're able to realize when we're coming from that position. And studies show it's less than 10% of what we're capable of. Go ahead.
No, well, I mean, I was just going to say, do you think that we're intentional? I mean, I can't believe, I guess I don't want to believe that we're leading in that way, because I mean, I think what you just said is really, really important. That I think sometimes the things that we say, we don't realize that's the impact of I mean, because I'm not intentionally leading by fear.
Sure, nobody, very few are.
But it is what you say and how you say it, and sort of the, I guess it's subtle, but it's really powerful.
Well, if you look at the driver and how we operate as a human being from the brain perspective, we're pretty much operated from the amygdala, which is the fight, flight, freeze mechanism. And it's there to protect us. So as we're going through life, we're having a multitude of experiences that are stored neurologically so that when we re-experience something, we already have a game plan. We already have a reaction to whatever action has occurred. And the interesting thing is 95% of people react based on a past experience, not what's most optimal in the moment they happen to be in right now. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we kind of come from the fear element, because number one, it's very effective. We're innately designed to protect ourselves and propagate the species. And so when a leader is coming from that himself, because he has objectives to meet and he has timelines, so there's a little sense of urgency. And now all of a sudden I got to care. And, why don't it just, I think it was beautifully said by Henry Ford when they asked him, so you've got all thousands of people now, and what do you think of that? And his response was, why can't they just bring their hands to work? And that whole element of dealing with drama is something that leaders have to embrace, because that's the human species. We've got stuff going on. And if you're just trying to just barge into all my thought processes and everything I'm trying to do to make it work in my life, I'm sorry, I can't give you my undivided attention. And so one of the elements is to slow down a little bit, take a time out, and recognize I have an amazing human being that I'm relating to now. What's going on with them? And boy, when you give permission for people to share that, and they don't take much time either, it's not like a waste of time. In fact, they say every 10 minutes you've invested in your people and pure caring gives you about 3 hours of extra time. Because now we're communicating, we're clear, people know what the outcome is and what the intention of the outcome, and it's easy for me to operate that way. I'm not having thoughts about, I feel I knew what I was going through. And that's a big challenge.
So, I mean, if I'm a leader and I just, you want to examine your whole way you talk to people now, but how do you get out of the habit? I mean, I guess number one, how do you help people recognize that tone or that behavior or the way that you talk to people? And two, how do you help them break that habit?
That's a great question. And one of the first things to do is to have them recognize that they have ingrained habits and attitudes. And attitude is the key element, because do you have any idea what percentage of our performance is based on our attitude?
No, but I'm not going to like it.
100%. Okay. And attitudes are learned.
That makes sense.
By the time a child's about 10, they have about 100,000 attitudes. So you can imagine where we're at now. So step number one with a leader is, what are your attitudes about your people? That's the first thing to take a look at, because how long do you have to be with someone before you get to know their nuances and what their capabilities are. And without knowing it, you start leading that way. Well, this person, I can expect this from, this one I can expect that from. And interestingly enough, if we're getting reinforced from that as an associate, well, that's about all we do then for that individual, because that's all they expect out of us. So it's a mindset change. And it's the company, my company Apernio is a hybrid of two terms. The aperture of a camera is how the image gets in, and it comes through our lens. And then in neo in Latin is new. So it's about a new perspective. It's about the ability to accelerate performance and achievement by thinking differently. So have you ever known anybody, Rhett, that's late?
Perpetually, yes.
Okay. Do you have an attitude about that?
I do, yes.
Does it bother you a little bit? Okay. Here's what people aren't aware of. Yeah. How many times do they have to be late before you get an attitude?
Probably one or two.
Yeah. And now this is what's so amazing. Think about this. This is the power of us wanting to be right rather than successful, which again doesn't make any sense any more than we want to lead by fear than value.
Right.
But when a person shows up on time, this late person shows up on time, guess what happens? People get sarcastic.
Yeah.
Right? Would your watch break? I mean, what? And now the person, he or she's receiving this information, and they're going, "What the hell? What difference does it make to be on time? I'm still getting treated the same way." So the first step is to have leaders recognize I have attitudes. And then the other important element, which is certainly not new, is I've got to have my intent in the right alignment, which means to bring out the best in that human being. Mm-hmm. If they have a story, and did I find out why they were late? Typically not, because I have an agenda, you've held it up, and therefore I will go to the fear element and cop an attitude. And that attitude is felt just through energy, body language, maybe a raised eyebrow. I mean, it can be very, very subtle. But boy, does it ever linger in the mind of the person who received it.
Yeah, no, I totally. And, the more you talk about that, the more I'm thinking, wow, I've got to watch my attitudes, because I'm just as guilty of that sarcasm or that. Yeah, I mean, that it's really easy to fall into that, isn't it?
You bet. And what it takes quite a courageous and confident person to say, Rhett, I want to tell you how that affected me. And then
people won't say that.
No.
They're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell their colleague. They're not going to tell their boss that.
No. So, and then we wonder, why isn't this person performing? And here's what's interesting. Since such a large percentage of corporations operate that way, from the fear-based mentality, it's become the norm. So when you do get to the value-based mentality, why do people want to come to work? Why are they making a living to begin with? Mm-hmm. And those are kind of questions a lot of people don't even get asked of them, which causes them to start thinking and recognizing that, boy, I don't want to be thinking or doing things that's going to keep that from happening. And all of a sudden, when you work with an organization, it's almost like determining that if we have all of our walls painted red, we'll all be very successful and get what we are getting up in the morning to accomplish. And then when you get to work, you realize you got some painting to do. And that's what a collective vision is all about. So there's a lot of avenues, but the first one is do you care? And I haven't thought many leaders that say, no, I don't. And when you do, you realize that this person either has the opportunity to recognize that attitude is going to hold them back, or that this is not an organization that they can be successful in.
Yeah.
And that's also so cool about this education, Rhett, is you don't have to have tough conversations. You don't have to try to get into how am I going to correct this behavior without destroying self-esteem or morale. And sometimes that's why leaders don't even have the conversation, because they know the effects, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes perfect sense. What do you mean when you talk about performance-driven neurology?
Okay. when you said, I gee whiz, I wasn't even aware what my sarcasm could be doing, because everybody around me just kind of goes, hey, yeah.
You're laughing at my jokes because I'm the boss, right?
I did a seminar once and I had about 700 people in the audience, and it just started out. And someone in the back of the room says, hey, Mr. Olsen, you got any sunglasses? And I said, no, why? I said, he said, I need them to block that glare from your forehead. And the whole audience is laughing. Now they haven't gotten any of the education I'm about to share. And I'm laughing, and inside I'm going, asshole.
You shit jackass.
I can get along. They were only kidding, but it impacts me. And now I have to work hard to like that person, or I'll violate and be a hypocrite on my own education and treat them differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes on moment by moment by moment in organizations. So rather than stepping on ice, the neuro-driven element is I now know the impact that my thinking has. And I recognize that I'm a work in progress as well, that if I don't know, I can't do anything about it. And thank goodness somebody's helping me be aware without pointing the finger at me. So, and that's what sustains the most, is that self-discovery. When you say, wow, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah. How do you how does a leader, I'm fascinated by this. How do you change a culture how does a leader change that culture that let's say you've worked with them and they realize, hey, I've really got to change the tone around here. I've got to change. To me, that's culture change. And how do you do that? And can you fix people? Do I go to people and apologize for what I've said or my sarcasm? How do I fix all that?
Oh, well, there's a bundle of questions in there.
That's a awful question, but
I love your curiosity, because I think, first off, how do I fix it? Well, you can't fix it. Okay. The person's got to want to fix it themselves, but you can model the behaviors, right, that you want. And if you've seen someone's offended, always a great way to introduce it is just what you said. If I felt like I've offended you, I'm going to go, hey, Rhett, I need to apologize to you. And I always disarm someone, because now they're like, oh, what do I do with that? Am I going to fight an apology? I may not believe it. I may be skeptical about it. But then when you go on to say, the other day you were doing such and such, and I made kind of a sarcastic remark, that was not my intention. I just want you to know that I'm really pleased that you're working with us and you've accomplished what you've been able to accomplish. And then watch out for the praise recognition challenge, because reinforce what actions and behaviors you want. And most people just praise, hey, great to see you today. Really? Instead, hey, I wanted to tell you how much impressed I was by the way you wrote that lead in to the Johnson account. That was so specific and clear. What do you think their next report they turn in is going to be?
Stellar.
Stellar. But you're right. Forgiveness, the only person who can fix themselves is themselves. But they've got to be in an environment where the organization has created a vision that is collective. And when I go into a company that already has a vision, I help them create the buy-in within the associates by helping associates identify how they're going to be successful by participating in what the organization is trying to do. And that's an easy thing to do when you got 15, 30 people. But when you get growing up to thousands, it can get lost in translation. And sometimes the leader doing it themselves is not as effective as someone else coming in that people know doesn't have a hidden agenda. And then even though they accomplish what they wanted to accomplish to begin with, they get there in twice the time, half the time with twice the fun. Who wants to do it if it takes twice the time? And that's because of the performance-driven neurology. I now know how I think, because one of the first things I do is I put everybody through a day and a half education. Mm-hmm. And the pushback is unbelievable from leadership, about a day and a half. But after they go through it, they just wonder why they hadn't done something like this before, because now they have a common language. Now everybody knows that they're responsible, not someone else. And everybody is a part of the solution now, as opposed to trying to get their way. Now we're trying to get the way, which is what the organization is attempting to accomplish and how I can be successful and reach what I want by participating in that.
How do you filter that down through an organization?
Okay. Once that has taken place, and it's called vision building, once that's occurred, then we start with the leaders. We start in a program called leadership. And basically what it is just, I've created a program that uses the 10 letters, and there's a concept behind each one that they act upon. And then they come back together and they share their responses. And that's where the real growth starts to occur. Like the first one, for instance, that letter L is about listening. And most of us are horrendous at it. I mean, your audience right now has probably thought of a lot of things. Well, our lips have been moving and we've been sending audio waves out there to their ears. The only way they're really going to be interested is we happen to share something that's in alignment with what they're attempting to accomplish right now. Otherwise, it's just information. So one of the things we learn as a listener is, how do I make sure I have an audience before I open my mouth? Because just because there's people in front of me or images on the screen doesn't mean I have an audience. It means I have images. How are they listening? And so you always start out with, in any meeting, with, would there be any value if you were able to increase productivity by 15% in the next week, you probably will get some people to listen. Now, someone who's not motivated by money, for instance, that's just going to be lips moving. So it's an element of a leader realizing that, number one, the most important element that they have in that organization beyond anything else, including customer, is the people that they are surrounding themselves with. And they need to be treated with dignity and respect. And we've heard all this before, but how do we actually go about doing that? And for some leaders, it's trial and error. And then they recognize, well, that didn't work. Okay, but what'd you learn from it? And as you, being an outstanding coach that you are, you realize that feedback's a breakfast of champions, as Kurt Vonnegut once said, and it's the right feedback, though.
Yeah,
you can't tell anybody what they need to do, can you? You got to help them discover.
Yeah. For you? What is an achievement acceleration company? What does that mean?
An achievement acceleration company is an organization that wants to get where they're going in a shorter period of time than they're currently on. It's someone who has achievement after achievement. And it's all about, what are they envisioning? What is their expectation? Because that's what drives every one of us. And if the expectation isn't wonderful enough, we're only going to do enough to get people to be satisfied with the expectation.
Right.
And so it's helping a company raise their expectation, helping an individual raise their expectation. An example of this is I had the opportunity to, I had a Lexus client out in Akron, Ohio, and one of the quarterbacks from the Cleveland Browns came into one of the meetings, and he mentioned that one of the coaches would be interested in what I had to offer. So it was a football team. So I went and I put their whole team, 75 people, through this education, and most of them had hoodies on and were sound asleep. And the coaches had their arms folded and weren't necessarily very interested. And the reason they weren't is because how the head coach did not get their buy-in. He just brought me in. So that's going to fail to begin with. Yeah. And then secondly, they had probably one of the worst seasons they'd had. The coach got fired. And it was not necessarily, a proud account that I had. But who heard about this was the soccer team, the men's soccer team. Now, this is MAC division. It's Mid-Atlantic Conference. It's one of the smaller divisions in the country. Right. Yet they're playing Division I soccer, Stanford and, Union Michigan. And what I came in to do is I put the players through. They hung on my every word. The coaches couldn't get enough information. And we set to win the national championship. Now, no MAC team has ever won a national championship in any sport in history.
Really? Okay. Wow.
And now the idea was that we'd already won it. So when we're out there playing, we know we're going to win. The other team is trying to win. And just that subtle difference can make all the difference. And they ended up having a best year they'd ever had, but they didn't make it to the national championship. So we got the trophy, we made a copy of it, all the things that you kind of have heard about before. And in the mid-season, the coach called me up and said, Mike, can you come in and talk a little bit to my team? They're getting a little lackadaisical. I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, they were up by a goal, and then the other team scored, and then we scored in 2 minutes. 10 minutes go by, the other team scores, and then we score in 10 minutes. So they're playing enough to what, right? And he goes, come on in. So I came in, and I talked with the group, and I said, I got a question for you. What's the most goals you've ever scored? And they said something like 4 or 5. And I said, 4 or 5. I said, who are you playing tomorrow? And they said, Michigan. And now Michigan was on a roll. They were rocking. And this was 2010. And I said, how about you score 7 tomorrow? And they started to laugh. And I looked at the kid who was laughing. I said, what are you laughing about? Oh, I'm sorry. Are you telling me that you don't believe you folks are capable of that? Well, no. And I said, well, what would you need to be doing differently than you're doing now for that to be accomplished? And they chatted. Anyway, the end of the season, they invited me down to California, Santa Barbara, where they were in the national championship. And the coach asked me in the beginning if I'd talk to the players. This was before the game started. So I walked into the players, we sat down, and I said, I want you to imagine 10 years from now, and your daughter or son is sitting on your lap. They're going to look up into your eyes and say, Dad, you won the national championship, didn't you? And you're going to tell them, yes, I did. And then they're going to ask you, what was the game like? And that's what you're going to go out and do, is create that story. And they won 2-1.
Wow.
And then that happened to be Caleb Porter, who then got picked up by the major leagues. And he's one of 6 coaches in the world or in history that's won 2. And he's one of 3 coaches who's won with 2 different teams. And again, the difference was, do I own the vision before I get there, or would it be nice to accomplish it?
I love that. Do I own the vision? I mean, that's powerful, powerful, powerful.
And to teach people how to do that is where the real rubber hits the road.
Yeah, and it all starts, I think, like you were talking about, with attitude and habits, right? Absolutely.
And recognizing that we weren't born with attitudes, that's the good news. They're learned behaviors. Now, we're born with a temperament. We certainly have proclivities to different, are more athletic than others, right? And
right.
Mechanical and that type of thing. But the attitude, what I teach is not only do you have an attitude, but how to change the attitude should it be standing in your way. And you change the attitude the same way you got it, which was an experience through repetition. But now instead you get the vision. And now in a corporation, everybody has an attitude about the success they're going to achieve when vision is accomplished. And here's the key, Rhett. They behave like it now. And that's the answer to accelerated achievement. They don't wait till the quarter is over and then analyze how they did. Those are forecasts anyway, and you can change a forecast.
Yeah, you can. I had Steve Kotler on yesterday, and we were talking about peak performance and being in the zone, right? And I mean, this is in order to get people so that they can be in that creative place and working at a very high level. I mean, it starts with a lot of what you're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can get that part of it right, your people are going to perform. I mean, you're going to see your productivity shoot up. You're going to see retention. You're going to see. I mean, you're going to see all kinds of benefits from it.
It's what engagement is all about. All those studies Gallup has done and what people are doing now on how do I keep my people here? Well, millennials, they'll have 5 or 6 jobs, da 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 da. I had 22 before 1983, and so the whole, one of the biggest question I get from leaders now is, how do you motivate a millennial? I love that. You know what my answer is? Ask them.
There you go.
They're no different than you and I. We all have the same brain. We just have different information in it, but it basically processes the same. And we understand that, we're able to make internal changes that create amazing results. And also,
I think we put people in categories way too much.
Oh, I do too.
We are all the same in my view. I mean, I think we, like you said, you got to ask Rhett what motivates him, what drives him. You got to ask Larry. You got to ask, you got to ask your people, because we're all motivated by something different.
And you have to be okay with the answer.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, otherwise you're labeling again, aren't you? You're labeling their answer. The only thing, an organization has a right to create the parameters. A football team all plays with the same dimensions. The difference is in how they play and the plays that they call. And that's the same thing in our lives. We all, make decisions the same way based on experience. And when you break away from the fact that 95% of those experiences you're basing your decisions on now are based on the past. And that's why the brain is so effective. It loves routine. That way it doesn't have to stop and think. You and I, when we started, the guests aren't aware of this, but you weren't getting any sound. I wasn't getting any sound from you. And I thought, well, that's going to make an interesting podcast. But right away, we could have panicked, but I knew there was resolution.
Right. There's always that.
It was disconnecting an amazing mic and having to speak through the computer, which really puts me out of round, because that's not the picture.
That's right.
But I'll get this fixed. But in the meantime, you and I will enjoy each other. And that's the key in a company. All the problems aren't going to go away, but we're enjoying ourselves now because we know we're finding resolution. And we look forward to the problem because it's just another thing to overcome until we reach vision.
Yeah. And if you have that sort of purpose, and you have that sort of unity, or that team, right? You can solve those problems. Those problems are, they don't, they're not this sort of insurmountable thing, right? If you know that you're working, if the person next to you's got your back, then, and you trust them.
Yeah. And we all know about the power of trust. And yet what I would share with you in your audience is I get below the radar. I get into what people aren't aware of. Because it's a kind of a niche market. Most people that talk to other people about what the latest trends are, or the best way to get to someplace, and everybody wants efficiency and everybody wants it yesterday. And yet the sustainability comes when I understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Simon Sinek popularized why, but we've been asking it since the origin of man, and we stopped doing it with other human beings and organizations. Whenever I get called into account to a new client, my first question is, why am I here?
Yeah.
No pitch. There's no sales. There's just, is this something that I can make an effective movement in? And if not, neither one of us are going to work.
Right. And if they don't know why they've hired you, then you're in trouble.
Well, Johnson & Johnson had you, okay.
Well, they had a clear why.
That's right. Yes. So what do you think motivates you? Why do you get up in the morning, Rhett?
Because I love life.
Because you love life. What is it about life you love?
I'm curious.
You're curious.
I'm curious by nature.
Okay. What does curiosity mean to you?
I mean, I'm an adventurous person, so I like to touch and feel. I'm a very tactile person too. I like to touch and feel and see things and inspect things, and so for me, I'm a kid in a candy store. I mean, I really am, and I want to see how things work. I want to know, the inner workings of it and what makes it tick. So for me, that drives. I think that's why I really love coaching, is because uh, you're like a mechanic, right? You're like a mechanic. You're getting in there to diagnose what's going on and what's happening and why this particular individual or this team is not functioning like it should.
Gotcha. Is that something that you kind of popped out of the womb, and your family kind of found that in you, as well as you're finding that in yourself as a little kid?
I look back now and say, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. I did that, or when I did this, or when I did that, and my parents would probably say, yeah, that that is it. That's him to a T.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, you're blessed to be able to do something you're passionate about.
I am. I don't. There's absolutely
no doubt. Well, what I did with you and I together was care, and care has got to be about you. And that's why when you said I'm curious, everybody's heard the term curious, but I don't know what you mean by curious.
Right.
And this is where with my podcast, probably just like yours, the person's answer is where my next question generally comes from. Because if I don't understand them, how am I going to be able to be any value to them? And that's the same thing with everybody whether you're a parent or whether you're a leader at work, and everybody's a leader at work because they're the only ones looking out of their own eyes. And they're the ones whose decisions are going to cause the action that's going to get the results that they're either looking for or not. And either one is a win when you have the right mindset.
And I saw what you did, because it's that second and third question. It's the follow-up questions, right?
Yes.
It's not how are you doing. It's
right.
How's the family, or how are the kids, or how's that? Did they win that tournament the other day when they played soccer?
Right.
It's
and then listening for the answer. Yeah. Not, okay, now I checked that box off. I went to a program and I'm supposed to care about my people. And this is what can be silly sometimes. I had a leader years and years back in the 80s who was very, very matter of fact. And he ended up going through a seminar, and he came back, and we came in on Monday morning, and he goes, Larry, where are you on the Nelson account? Oh, wait a minute, Larry, how was your weekend? And I didn't even want to answer because it just wasn't genuine. And that's where I think, in part of this, Rhett, the key to this is not trying. Because trying implies doubt. Doubt leads to hesitation. Hesitation leads to failure. You either want to care or you don't want to care. And if you go, well, I don't know how, well, then start acting like someone who cares. How do you lose weight? Start acting like someone who weighs the weight you want to be. That way your change occurs immediately, because now you're feeding that, not the old image of you, even though it was only 30 seconds ago. The change has got to start here, and then it kind of works its way out.
Yeah, and you saw right through him, so it wasn't even.
No, we abhor manipulation. Abhor it. That's why we always say just looking when we walk in someplace, and then we can't find the salesman when we need him. But that's that same kind of attitude. And you don't want your people saying just looking. You want them to be living, and you want them to be enjoying. And like you said, I mean, because you have that infectious little grin on you that is endearing and makes me feel comfortable and makes me feel like you really actually care about what I have to share. And that probably makes me talk more than I should be in this podcast, but that's the key. And
that drives some people crazy, but I'm glad it made you feel comfortable. This has been fun, Larry. We got to do this again. So
I love it.
I know that we're getting close to our time, but so how how can people find you and your work and the book and get in touch?
Well, thank you. You won't find the book on Amazon. You will find it.
I didn't say that.
Yes, I know. You'll find it on aperneo.com, APERNEO. And there's more information and how to get in touch with me and all that. But it's really been a treat, Rhett. This is not anything that I had expected. So thank you. I can see why you're an award-winning coach.
Well, thank you. And we're going to have to do this again because this was a really fun conversation.
Thank you.
You can check out the schedule at powerlunch.live. We've got some great guests coming up in the next few weeks. And until tomorrow, have a great day. We'll see you at 12 noon Thursday.
All right.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you. Take care, buddy.